Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for today, Wednesday, May 27th. If you'll please rise to a pledge of allegiance. Neil, if you'll lead us. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Here.
Director Andrews?
Here.
Director Bennett?
Here.
Director West?
Here.
Director Borchert?
Here. Dave Schwabauer, I see Robert. Those are the alternates. Agenda review.
Chair Mulhart, one of your members has requested that we move some items out of order. More specifically, we'd like to move 3, 4, 5 up ahead of public comments, say public comments, board comments, and the consent agenda for the last in an attempt to allow them to go to another meeting earlier.
Okay.
Cover some of the meatier issues in the board packet.
Okay.
Chair,
Yes.
I'm that person that I have to leave at 2:20, so I was trying to see if we could get to the meat of the agenda as much as we could before I left.
Okay. Anybody have any problems with that? Okay, so directed. All right, let's deal with item number 3.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, board members, Gerhard Hubner for the record. I'll be presenting this item. This is item number 3. Proposed plan to develop a groundwater sustainability plan within 1 year. I have a brief presentation. Stop me if you want me to go a little bit slower, but I'll be moving briefly through the item.
Okay, Jessica, Andy Waters just came in. Andy Waters, yeah.
So as you recall, back at your April 22nd board meeting, your board directed us to return with a proposed plan to develop a groundwater sustainability plan in 1 year and also identify any policy decisions or policy issues that need to be made that were fundamental for addressing some of the sustainability yield, the allocation system, and funding to cover the cost associated with the GSP development. So we've outlined essentially 5 things that you need to consider if you want to move forward with this proposal. Number 1, we do need to have some stakeholder buy-in and, of course, your board approval on the scope of work to be performed by the staff and any consultant services. Of course, we also need the funds allocated to pay for the work effort. We do need clear board direction to staff regarding several of the long-term policy issues. Implementation will have to proceed at a rapid pace for the scoping and acquiring of the consultant services. And then we'll have, through the implementation of the plan development, an accelerated stakeholder technical and board review, comment period to get to the draft, and then ultimately the final product that we can submit to DWR. So in the scope of work, and again we're going back to SGMA, requires DWR to create technical criteria and regulation before June 1st. So keep that in mind. That's out there. That will be occurring next year. So some of the assumptions that we're proposing to you today as we move forward is we have one GSP for the entire agency with different basins addressed in sections or chapters within that plan and then appendices in the final document. We would rely on existing published data and information, any studies that are out there, including our existing 2007 plan, work that's been done by United, work that's been done by LPUG, and others. And to expedite the process, we would propose to use an industry recognized draft GSP. This outline is provided for you as a starting point, and that's included in your packet today. By the way, we received that through United staff, and it's UC Davis, the Center for Watershed Science, is the author of that. We did review that. We did make some modifications and edit it to better fit some of the characteristics and needs of the agency. And again, that draft item is attached for you to look at. As you can see, there's quite a bit of detail in there, and of course, DWR may change that as we get closer to the deadline that I mentioned earlier. So in the initial scoping for the GSP and the elements, certainly, as I mentioned before, we would look at our existing groundwater management plan, the 2007 plan, areas that are still relevant and areas that would need additional work. We would develop that scope of work, and we would work towards solicitation of a consultant with the development of that, an award of a contract, and, of course, contract oversight and management. This would have evaluations that would include water budget parameters, basin-specific groundwater allocation systems, sustainable yield and monitoring programs, storage component, the definition included from SGMA from undesirable results, and the document would, of course, include management strategies existing and looking forward. That draft, when available, would be circulated for review, and then again, as I mentioned, upon adoption by your board, provided to DWR. So, any existing available geological or hydrogeological data gaps would be fully explored, but any that would be outstanding would have to be addressed at a later time. And we would rely on existing available data from United, Cayugas, any past modeling efforts, any conceptual models that are out there, any data that we could get a hold of. And so that full disclosure, we've included for you with these data gaps a draft list of technical questions that will have to be looked at as we do our GSP development. And that's included as item 3B, or attachment 3B. So let's look at some of the elements that would be as part of this GSP. Sustainable yield, water budget, very important. We've talked about this at numerous board meetings. We've looked at that the 100,000 value. So we would propose that a comprehensive sustainable yield analysis, including a water budget, be done for the 7 sub-basins, and they're listed up above on the slide. And this sustainable yield approach would be based on estimated water budget balance, including looking at the hydrologic cycle, inputs, outputs. Now, again, we would have to put it out there that there may be a high range of uncertainty with the time frame and the scoping of where the available data is. And anybody that's interested in what essentially we're talking about, just a simple graphic, conceptual water budget. You look at all the surface water inputs, the outputs, same for groundwater, any interaction. You have a component for environmental, you have a component for municipal, you have a component for industrial and agricultural. All that's considered, and essentially inputs and outputs gives you the budget, ultimately gets you to your yield number, or proposed yield number. Turning to the second big element in our what we propose in this GSP would be our allocation system methodology. That would be to look at other entities that have either successfully implemented or have proposed allocation systems, looking at the merits, providing some recommendations. Look at an allocation system on a basin-by-basin approach. One size fits all may not necessarily be appropriate. We would evaluate that. And then basins that have an allocation system or are in the process of vetting an allocation system would be included as long as they could demonstrate that they're linked to a sustainable yield of that particular basin. Another big element mentioned earlier is management strategy. What do you do when you get that yield? What do you do when you get that allocation system is sort of the implementation side. So we would build upon what was in our 2007 GMP and provide that in the draft document. Of course, all of this requires funding. So to complete it in 1 year, we would need to include funding in our 2015-2016 budget. We estimate the cost to complete it in a 1 year time frame, approximately $1 million. How do we come up with this $1 million? Professional judgment, experience with other plan developments, both recently and in the past, talking with United staff in terms of costs for doing a sustainable yield in other basins and so forth. Could be less, could be more. It's a number that we've proposed today. Your board We'd also need to look at several long-term policy issues. We've included as attachment 3C for you today, and these are the 22 that were listed as part of the long-term issues that we recently completed back in April. We've highlighted several of those that are important to have decided upon. So I just used an example of the seawater intrusion that pertains to the yield. Several others also pertain to the yield. This would be beneficial from a cost and efficiency standpoint to the consultant if those kind of decisions were made prior to them working on particular sections in the plan. Later, there would be other policy decisions that you would need to be looked at in terms of the allocation and management strategies. The process for scoping work and acquiring consultant services, pretty standard, at least for us in Public Works Agency. Develop the scope of work, issue a request for proposal for consultant services. We review them, we rank them, we provide a recommendation, and we come back to your board at a future date with a proposal to fund and award that contract. Process, we estimate, will take approximately 3 months. So turning to the stakeholder technical board review of these draft documents, SIGMA requires, and it's just good practice, we practice this through the agency's routine activities, but it requires public and stakeholder involvement in the GSP development. This process would have to be accelerated. We likely would need a technical advisory group to discuss and vet certain elements of the draft GSP. We propose that the agency's board meetings be used as the at-large public outreach forum versus trying to replicate something else. And when we arrive at the draft GSP, we would propose that the board have a special meeting late summer, early summer of next year, late spring, early summer. You get your draft GSP, board considers the documents revised, and the board would adopt the final GSP sometime after that, and of course then submittal to DWR. 2 more slides for you. So this is just to re-emphasize the one-year plan. Does use easily accessible knowledge, studies, data, and reports. We are proposing to use the existing basin, sub-basin boundaries, that those remain unchanged at this point, perhaps revised at a different time. The sustainable yield methodology is based upon the research other entities have conducted with the estimated inflows and outflows, and then the groundwater responses in response to those inflows and outflows have an accelerated public review process. The GSP would be available to DWR in 1 year, and that this would remain a work in progress. So we're looking today that you endorse, do a strong endorsement on these assumptions if you decide to move forward. Including this, you have a timeline in front of you. You may not be able to see exactly all the fine details on it. Apologize for that. So essentially put it in a text format for you. This is item attachment 3D. So you look at it. These are the first things that need to be done by October 1st. Your policy decision, get a contract with consultant services. Subsequently, in October of this year, we'd embark on all 4 of those bulleted items. Those are the main elements I described earlier. April 1st, have a draft GSP. July 1st, depending on the comments received, potentially final. And with that, our recommendation today is that you provide us with feedback and direction, an endorsement of a 1-year plan, funding, and review and decision-making process to move forward. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Jeff. Chair Mahler, just some supplementary comments to Gerhardt's presentation. One is in your package labeled as item 3A, the first attachment. Gerhardt touched on this, but I just want to make sure it's clear to you that DWR is not due to have guidelines for what's in the GSP until 2016. What you have before you is our best guess. There's drafts out there. It's our best guess, so it's a roadmap for us. The second thing I'd like to talk to you about is that, the $1 million, I'm sure most of you are rolling back on your chairs when you see that number. your board has in place processes that controls the expenditures. I mean, we have very tight processes. I don't even have authority for more than 5,000. It's our best guess on the outside based on what we're hearing from others and knowing that you have tight processes. We just don't want you to be shocked. So when you start looking for funding, you're looking for an appropriate amount. In 3C, the policy areas, that item, or the attachment 3C, those that are dark gray and those that are white, although that looks complicated, you can divide those into 3 categories. The first one is you got to figure out how much your base and yield is. The second thing, and that's, we need policy direction on those issues from you, most Ricky Tick as an ASAP. Number 2, you got to figure out how you're going to share it. That's the allocation area. That can wait. Work on that can be done in parallel, but it can wait until, for final numbers, until you have the answer to number 1. And number 3 is just the management strategies. What do you do if your assumptions are wrong? What do you do if or how do you make this adaptive, that sort of thing. So they can be grouped in those 3 categories, not overly complex. And finally, it should be stated that if we go forward with this GSP in 1 year, it's clear the decks at GMA Central. This marries 3 things: the work plan, what Sigma tells us we have to do to develop a GSP, and what we've affectionately called the Bennett-Malhart plan, parts of which can be used in all this process. So just so you know, that's what we're talking about as you begin your deliberations.
Okay. First of all, any questions for Gerhard? Any members?
Question for our council. Assuming we go forward with this and we come up with a plan before the state comes out with their guidelines, I assume it's, if there's a guideline that is required, we simply can adjust the plan at that point in time?
Correct. Sigma does allow for GSPs to be updated from time to time and as needed based on new information.
Great, thanks.
Anybody else have any questions?
Gerhard, does the process include, I understand that because of the accelerated timeline, we're necessarily going to rely on the existing knowledge base, but we all know there are critical flaws in that existing knowledge base. Does the process include having peer reviews or engineering studies done on that knowledge base to ensure its adequacy?
Can I answer that, Gerhard?
Sure.
A lot of what we're looking for from your board today is how we're going to set that process up. What is it your board wants to see in that process? So we can say yes or no to that question at this point. It can or can't. It's really where your board wants to go. We're really looking for process direction. This is going to be a concentrated work effort not only on the staff's part, but on your board's part. And as I've mentioned to you before, but I'll just mention it again, we get about 20 hours of your time a year if we don't call any special meetings. And a lot of that is, the day-to-day administrivia that we go through. So you'll need to take that into consideration. We have the committee set up. There may be special board meetings required, and we really would like process direction from you.
And I think it kind of speaks to your mention of a technical advisory committee. I think a process like that would be critical to assess the integrity of the data before we make decisions relying on that data. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. We
Others?
definitely contemplated that.
I think we need to address the, I'll call it the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is why, since I'm one of the guys pushing to get this done, why are we pushing as hard as we are? And I think it's important for the board and for the public to understand. Under the way the rules are written, there's a lot of things we can't do as an agency to solve our long-term problems on the supply side of the equation unless we have a GSP in place. The GSP is the linchpin because the solutions are pegged to a plan that says this is what your yield is, this is what your allocation is, here's your roadmap to get there. So if it takes 5 to 10 years, historically we know that's true, to get a project in place that deals with the supply side of the equation, regardless of what basin you're in, but the supply side of the equation, it's important that we get to the state as quickly as we can. one of the comments we made to the state is they're expecting at some point in the future, at about the 4-year point, to be flooded with a boatload of plans, and they do not have the staff to deal with that. So if you submit a plan to the state and they don't buy off on it, you could wait a year, year and a half, 2 years for them to say, yep, this is a good plan. All it does is add to the delay. Second of all, the feedback I've gotten and the assumptions that I've made is that I think the state is looking for the GMA, because we're ahead of the game by a whole bunch of other agencies or non-existing agencies that are trying to be formulated. I think they're looking for guidance and direction from us, and I think pegging our initial cut to the University of Davis out of that institution, I think will stand well with the state, because I don't see them being so far out of whack with what the University of California, because they're looking for guidance from a variety of entities that deal with this on a academic level, on a technical level, and a practical level. I think they're looking for guidance from us on a practical level. So if you put the overall view on this, right now we have the authority to work on the demand side. We have the authority to deal with the supply side if we get a plan in place. We have the state proposing to have the guidelines for a plan a year from now, and if we elect not to do anything, the only real course of action we have is on the demand side, with no real opportunity to start addressing the supply side. And I believe that at least the message I've gotten from cities, I've gotten it from growers, I've gotten it from a variety of folks have said, we look for certainty, we look for predictability, we need to know how much water we can use and what is our allocation, because we've got a plan for it. We had a meeting last week, Jeff was not there, Mike Solomon and I had a meeting a week or so ago with the city of Oxnard, and the city of Oxnard is trying to decide how they're going to go forward, and they're looking for a certain element of certainty. And some of that is, when can the GMA produce funding to help offset the cost of bringing skids 2 and 3 on board? You can't do that until I have a plan, because the plan gives me authority to propose a basin replenishment fee. So all of these things are sequential. All of these things are dependent on each other, and I think we have enough technical stuff to move forward. I don't think we have to produce a perfect plan. I don't think the plan has to be 100% perfect. I think as policy, staff is asking for policy. I think one of the policies we ought to say is that this plan will be a work in progress almost forever, because things will change forever. It's not a case of producing a plan and throwing it on the shelf and saying, okay, that square's filled, now let's get on with other things. I think the answer is that whatever plan we produce, as we learn more or get more refined or find out certain things don't work, the board is going to have to make adjustments. We're going to go through the public process to make those adjustments so it becomes a working tool. So this technical committee that we're going to have to put together will have a role to play going forward. We have 3 committees. We need to utilize those committees. We need to utilize the fiscal committee, the operations committee, and the executive committee, and start breaking down some of the decision matrix that we're going to have to make as we work our way through this plan over the next year. And I think Jeff is right. It may be that what we're going to have to do is we're going to have a few more special board meetings, and I'm prepared to call those special board meetings. I believe it's important to get to the front of the line at the state and say, this is our best guess right now. There's enough caveats in that, and we'll adjust them as we learn more. It's predicated based on a Davis model, so it's not going to be that far off base. It puts us in a position to have the real discussion on what are the supply side projects, whether it's in Las Posas or in the Oxnard Plain. It starts the process of giving certainty to the cities, to the growers and everybody. I think all of that good can come from it. And I think it's well worth spending the time and energy to front load it and get it done. I don't like to spend $1 million. No one does. But I think the long-term benefit of moving this project along in a sequential fashion, making it a high priority. So the policy I would propose is that the board is willing to have the meetings as necessary to answer the questions, to deal with the tough issues that we have to answer. That I would propose that any of those questions that you can break down into the respective committees, that we need to use the committee process. If we have to modify the committee process, we ought to have that debate as well. And I think we need to take our existing plan, modify it where we can modify it, adjust it where we adjust it, recognize that it's not probably going to be perfect, but it gets us off dead center, pushes us way down the road, further than all kinds of folks in the state, and I think that's a good thing, and I think it gives us direction. I'm pleased that we have the GSP process in place. If you recall, last year around this time, we had proposed to create a series of changes to the state, our state legislative authority to actually go through this process. And the state trumped that by creating this particular act. And I think it's time for us to capitalize on it. So just so that people understand that I think there's a method, at least in my mind. I don't know about the board. They can make comments and tell me where I'm wrong. You guys will tell me where I'm wrong. But my comment would be that I think it's an opportunity to move this down the road and take the work that we did this past year that Steve started and I endorsed. I think a lot of good work came out of that. Now it's time to apply that to the real world and use that as the tool to get these answers, to the answers we need. I think we can do that, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to move forward. So that's kind of the background as I see it. What are your thoughts and comments? Anybody in the public? Yes, ma'am. Yes, I need you to come up in your name and your city for the record.
Sorry, thank you. I'm Lynn Jensen with Ventura County CoLab, and I just wanted to make a couple of comments today. We think that this one-year plan fails to look at the broader perspective and will likely limit creative solutions down the road. The guidelines, as you said, from the state for GSAs aren't even available until 2016. And in order to meet this schedule, there are certain assumptions that will have to be incorporated, and one of them is to use only easily accessible existing knowledge, studies, data, and reports, such as the 2007 update of the Groundwater Management Plan. That's 8-year-old science that we're going to be starting with. And that the existing basin, sub-basin boundaries remain unchanged. I'm not sure which boundaries you're talking about, but I think that's important. Agriculture is important to this community. We feel strongly about that at CoLab, and the question is whether there's a collective will to ensure its survival. This item reflects a rush to judgment, putting policy decisions in front of science. SGMA requires a respect for water rights that must be considered in these allocation systems. And this lack of, what SGMA says in quotes is, lack of technical understanding about the basins has led to mismanagement. That's why they created SGMA. And rushing to policies with that lack of understanding that we have right now will perpetuate that mismanagement of the basins. We need to separate long-term sustainability from our short-term drought planning, and I think that we're trying to rush this thing through because we want to take care of the drought. But in reality, SGMA is not a drought planning tool. It is a long-term sustainable management tool. The GSAs are only supposed to be identified in the time schedule by June 30th of 2017, and the plans are adopted by 1/31 of 2020 or 2022, and we're trying to get this done in a year for some reason. I'm not sure why. I wanted to also make some comments about the fact that the LPUG solution, I've just been going to their meetings and listening to what they're saying, but their allocation system incorporates water markets as an innovative solution, and we think that that's critical to ag sustainability. And I want to read something from Matthew Feinup. He's actually doing his PhD at UCSB, and he was talking about the premise of Australian water markets is that water users, rather than governments, are best equipped to make complex decisions about how to allocate water to its most valuable uses. Water trading has been introduced gradually since the 1980s in Australia, and they're saying that this is the reason why they got through the millennial drought. And we think that this free market approach is very important to incorporate. The county can go to the state for funding for supply projects right now. It doesn't have to wait for a GSA. And even a 2 or 3 year plan would be accelerated with respect to other areas in California. So we recommend that you not set an unrealistic 1 year deadline such as this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good afternoon, Chair, board members. Robert Arani on behalf of Crestview Mutual Water Company. In thinking about this and what you're asking, I'm on the technical side. I spend a lot of time in the weeds, as Jeff would put it, in taking a look at things. And you're asking for a plan to be put together yet when you don't have a complete set of blueprints. There's 24 bills that are currently in the state legislature that is set up in order to talk about the SGMA and make changes to it. And some of them are going to get through, some of them are not. But to go ahead without a complete set of plans as to how to even design the plan or going forward seems foolhardy to me. I think, and especially given the amount of time that's spent with LPUG and going through the issues that are involved when you get down into the weeds of things, you got a full year just in technical issues to present in order to have some buy-in. A large group of people. I'm not talking about full consensus. I don't know that we're going to ever get there with everything. But in order to have a large group of the people behind me agreeing with you and being able to take that next step forward, you can spend quite a bit of time just laying the framework and the foundation for you in which to build the plan. We've had to change course now 3 times in LPUG over the past 5 years in trying to put our plan together and be responsive. And I would really hate to see that we go running around here over the next year and, so to speak, a fire drill, only to have to backtrack and keep the people moving along with us. You have a lot of technical data that's available. A lot of it has not been easily understood or even presented, probably, in order for everyone to understand. And as we've been asking for about the past year in LPUG alone, we're just waiting for you to get buy-in on what's the basin yield. We're asking for your help on that. You can, that's a great way in order to get the foundation in place for people to understand what is the challenge ahead of them. What is the basin yield and what is the shortfall in each basin? And that sets a lot of things in place for you, because only when you understand the foundational technical work that is in place can your policy decisions that you have to make be understood. One little tweak in your policy is going to have a significant effect on what is the yield. If you don't understand the yield to begin with, you're basing it on a bad set of flaws.
Okay. Anybody else? Jason.
Good afternoon, board members. Jason Weiner on behalf of Wish Toyo Foundation and its Ventura Coastkeeper program. Somewhat concur with those comments. We've been waiting to see the Safe Yield study for quite some time, and would hate to see a plan go forward without sound management decisions. One thing in particular that stands out to us is, of course, important to our organization and our members. A lot of folks throughout Ventura County, up and down the Santa Clara River, is this sustainable yield water budget element doesn't seem to take into consideration the flows needed to remain in stream to support public trust protected resources. And it would be great to receive some sort of clarity on your board's plan to incorporate that element into the budget, and to hear some more about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Andy.
Director Mulhart, Andy Waters, LPUG Chairman. Just from the meeting this morning, I'd like a brief update on item number 3. We agree with Jason there on sound management practices, and moving forward, the 5-year time frame seems to be highly accelerated from the state. We realize the board brought this together and directed staff to do so. We'd like to support staff on that and the direction of this. LPUG is going to continue to work on the yield and also the allocation scheme, and support staff and the board with whatever we can do.
Okay. So you're in support of moving forward?
No, I believe it's too fast. I mean, okay. We can get to the front. We can be at the front. We just don't need to be 5 years in the front. If we're there early, I get it. I agree. But I think this is a little bit too fast.
Thank you.
And again, we've been accused at LPUG we plan to plan to plan, and so I get it.
Okay. Yes.
Jeanette Lombardo, California Food and Agribusiness Advocates. First of all, I want to say what you're trying to do is admirable. I totally understand we need to work on the supply side for a change. We are 5 months into a 5-year process. The actual Groundwater Sustainable Program draft strategic plan from the state was just released on March 9th. And this is a game plan we're supposed to be following. I agree with what Robert says. There is over 20 pieces of legislation that's going to change what we're trying to implement, and we need to see how that all works out. In reviewing a comparison of the AB 3030 groundwater management plan that we have, the 2007 plan that was referenced in the presentation, in comparison to what needs to be in the plan for SGMA, there's 16 different items that we have to add to it. And one of those items is the measured objectives, including interim milestones in 5-year increments to achieve sustainable goals. To me, that makes making sure this plan is as accurate as possible from the very beginning very important, because we will be held accountable to it. I think there are some edge matching issues with the boundaries, and I think we should wait to see what happens in January of 2016. I think also rushing it in the time frame that was outlined here doesn't allow for the public process, which was intended under this legislation. We're just in the process of organizing stakeholders who don't know themselves, each other, and they working with groups that have never worked together before. And I think if we push this, it's going to lead to a path we don't want to be on, especially after all the work that's been put in by this management agency all these years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
For the record, Lucy McGovern with the City of Camarillo. I didn't have an intention to speak today, but just hearing some of the speakers kind of compelled me to say something about this, and I want to echo the other speakers' opinion on the fast tracking of this very important document and program. But one of the things that I wanted to, I'll let you guys decide and deliberate on the speed of that. But one of the things that I do wanted to emphasize was that I looked at the outline of the proposal the work scope that the staff has put together, and one of the things that I find a little bit, or at least need some additional clarification, was the stakeholder input. Just by having a technical committee and the general consensus meetings is not going to establish general stakeholder buy into a program that's very important for us. So I wanted to maybe expand on that and have that thought through a little bit more by staff and yourselves. The other part of it is the funding. You're looking at strategies that are going to cost a lot of money. You're going to need a lot of buy-in from stakeholders, and yet there's only a single. I don't know how expansive that whole funding and the replenishment fee process is going to be established, but that part of the financing is very important in moving a plan like this forward. So just wanted to provide that input.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Ms. McGovern. What stakeholder process would you recommend, or do you have any ideas about the right way to go about that?
Well, for example, the only one that I know is that was identified was a technical advisory committee. In that there are people that are very knowledgeable of in the basin that maybe not have the technical degrees to be considered an expert. Maybe the stakeholders, and when you look at this, the municipals, they've been living and pumping it. There's the agricultural folks. There's industrial folks that have been actually living under these situations and have probably maybe not information that's actually documented, but maybe just knowledge based by just living the whole situation itself. So it could be a series of maybe 3 or 4 different groups that maybe have input into the general process, stakeholder process.
Thank you. Okay. Brian.
Good afternoon, Directors. Brian Bondi, Cayugas, on behalf of Cayugas. Moving forward with achieving sustainable management is very important to Cayugas. As you know, we operate a aquifer storage and recovery facility that's the emergency water supply for 3/4 of the population of Ventura County. So we support moving forward as quickly as we reasonably can as a group of constituents and your board and staff, and we're committed to supporting the ongoing efforts that we provide to LPUG to provide input and through LPUG support your effort. 1 year may be too fast, but I think we'll find out as we go, and we're committed to working as hard and as fast as we can.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Members.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, your time limited, so please.
Well, I just was informed, that's why I had to walk out for a second, but the reason I had to go has been changed. So,
okay, all right, good. No, because this is an important discussion,
you're
so I'm pleased.
Right.
No, we're not stuck with it. It's an important discussion.
But a few thoughts. One, there's a reference to the 5-year time frame, and I would like to point out that we're not in the same spot that these basins, that many other basins are. I mean, there are basins that there's a 5-year time frame because they have no policy board created yet. They may take 2 years to create a policy board. They have no management structure. They don't have data. They haven't been around for 20 plus years. Actually, working on this this topic. There's all kinds of things that I think would suggest 5 years for them is not what an agency like we would need or would even be appropriate. Second point I'd point out is if after 20 plus years we don't have the foundation to do what I heard Director West say before was let's figure out what is our sustainable yield, and it won't be the final product, but it will be let's get started within a year, or at least have that as an appropriate goal that could be adjusted if we need to adjust it. I think we have to ask ourselves, what have we been doing for the 20 plus years? I hark back to about 18 months ago when the drought was really starting to get on everybody's radar screen. And this room was filled with everybody saying Fox Canyon hadn't done enough. Fox Canyon hadn't been doing anything. And what came out of that was Emergency Ordinance E, attempt to try to do something. So, when the crisis is on, people want to say, why don't you have it all put together? And the line was made that, we may end up on a path that we don't want to be on. If we don't get on a path, the longer it takes for us to get on the path, the longer it takes for us to make the hard decisions that we have to make to address the issue, which is what are the hard decisions we have to make on the demand side, and what are the hard decisions we have to make on a yield replacement, a sustainable yield fee that is out, or replenishment fee, and where do we go with those? Those projects are going to take a long time to come on board. So I think it's worthwhile for us to have the goal. And so I would support these things. I support the goal of trying for 1 year. I support allocating the resources that we have to do, recognizing that it's going to be a living document, that we won't get everything answered in a year, but we could have an argument made for the next 10 years about why a little more delay would give us a little more accuracy. A little more delay would give us a little more information, or a little more time for stakeholder input. And it's time for us to move forward. Thank you.
Gene?
Thank you. I have no objections to a 1-year framework, assuming that we can get reliable data on which to make decisions. I'm very concerned that we won't be able to. Part of that process necessarily includes stakeholders. I have some ideas about how to enhance that process, because I think what we're about to create, or will in the next year or so create, is going to impose a lot of changes on a lot of people. And it will command all sorts of sacrifices, probably system-wide. And I don't think we want to do that in a rush, but I think we want to do it in a hurry. And I'm not satisfied with the notion that it doesn't have to be a perfect plan. I don't like that approach, because I want the approach to be as near perfect as we can make it based on reliable data. If it takes a little longer than a year to get reliable data, I'm comfortable with that. But I agree with Director Bennett. I don't think we need to stretch this process out for years and years. Frankly, I think one of the first meetings I sat here at, I suggested we could do this in 24 months. A 12-month target doesn't offend me at all, because it might take us 24 months to do what we set out to do in 12, but I think we'd all benefit by that process.
That'd be the first time government ever didn't meet a deadline.
Or a budget.
Neil?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I also believe that the one-year goal is a laudable goal. I just don't think there's a chance of a snowball in hell of making 1 year. The thing that I want to know is what doesn't get bought because $1 million is diverted to this to try to make it in 1 year, and what work doesn't get done to try to do this in 1 year. And I haven't heard an explanation of those things, and until I could hear what the sacrifice is, I'd have a hard time supporting the rush here. The policy decisions alone are going to require a great deal of public input, I believe, and the engagement process, the public engagement process that's outlined here is very thin, in my view. So another reason why I think that recalibration may be appropriate. I see no reason why not to try to get it done as expeditiously as possible. I agree with that. I just think that 1 year is putting us into an area of unrealizable expectations, and that's the problem. And while I have the floor, if I may, I looked at all of the attachments and so forth, and I particularly focused on item 3C, which is the policy decisions. And I want to draw attention to B3, which is the credits issue, and the staff selected solutions, and I know why they are there, discontinue the programs and sunset accumulated credits. I'd like to offer a suggested alternative to that, because the individual organizations and individuals who accumulated those credits were accumulating something of value. They expected to be able to use those credits in the future, and they had a value. That value was the value of water. I think that it is, as a matter of equity, it is incumbent upon this agency to have a plan to compensate for the discontinued credits. And I think that's an appropriate policy alternative that should be in here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dave?
Regarding the money, we're going to have a fiscal committee meeting shortly. I think it's scheduled for June 9.
What is the date?
Is that correct, Jessica?
When, June 4th?
June 4. Thank you.
And just since we're on that date, what is the time? 1:30 here in the county.
Thank you. And yes, the allocation of resources, if the board decides to embark on this process, and I don't think it's a question of if, it's just more a question of the timeline. $1 million is a lot of money, but anybody who's seen how these things go in development of plans, it just takes lots of consultants and lots of money, and I just think it needs to be vetted more properly and budgeted, and I personally need to feel like we've got a solid number on this thing, not just pulling a number out of a hat out of kind of a quick survey. And Mr. Andrews' question of what doesn't get done in the meantime is an important question, because we still do have just kind of core functions in this agency that we have seen in the past tend to slip when we get hot on a certain subject. And so we need to account for that perhaps with, we've talked to Gerhard in the past in the committee about some additional staff. So I'm hoping that Gerhard can bring that to our meeting as well. I appreciate what Mr. Aranio said earlier about kind of needing the data first before we can move into the policy decisions. Certainly, perhaps we can begin the discussions on policy and allow people the time to weigh in on have that stakeholder process. But for this board to actually make adequate decisions, we do need to have that data in place. The multitude of minutia of data, perhaps not, but it seems that staff has a pretty good understanding of some of those gaps that I think need to be defined. And that will be an important part of getting to where we need to be. I'm also concerned about the concept of Mr. West said about this plan not needing to be perfect, that, you know, it can be a work in progress. The problem with that in my mind is that at the same time that takes away that certainty that we're trying to create by embarking on this in such a fast way. If, speaking from an agricultural viewpoint, if I'm going to plant new trees, that's a 30-year process. If I'm thinking that water allocations are going to be changing on a 5-year basis and I don't know what to plan for, that's going to affect that decision. And so, yes, I agree that perhaps there can be some flexibility and some review of data and some refinement of perhaps allocations or safe yield numbers. We have to do that in a way that's cognizant of business development and ongoing economic activity. If we just kind of throw the sticks up in the air every 5 years and nobody knows what to expect, that's the wrong way to go. I'm doubtful that this can get done in 1 year. I'm almost positive it can't be. But I don't have a problem with getting started. And as long as there's adequate stakeholder process and technical review, peer review of that this is truly a community-based project, then I can support getting started.
Okay. What I had heard staff ask for was some direction. And I think Jeff has used the terms before. We're trying to be above the weeds at this stage of the game and to give. So I've kind of written down some items that I've heard. So let me kind of go through these, and if you folks don't agree or want to modify. First, I've heard that we need to get started. The timeline of 1 year may have to be adjusted as we gain experience in the process, as long as the board recognizes that it's the end product that we're looking for, and we'll adjust the timeline as necessary, but it ought to be the goal. If we can, we make it. If we don't, we adjust it and we'll get a better product. But let's get started. I heard that. In no particular order. I heard from Dave, yes, there's going to be a fiscal committee, and we had heard that even staff in their report had said the $1 million was kind of a best guess at 100,000 feet altitude. We need to start tightening that down, and where that money was going to come from, and the effect on how much we have in reserves, where those funds are going to come from. How are we going to do that? We need to start tightening that up. Okay, I heard that issue, right? Okay. I heard we need to make sure that there is a balance or a methodology that stakeholders, and what's the form we're going to use? Is that what the primary form of the board process is going to be, or are we going to break it up as Lucy has suggested? But in any case, we need to make sure that we have the stakeholder input in addition to the technical input. I heard quite a bit about basin yield, and we actually had a plan created that said the basin yield was 125,000 acre feet. We've learned over time that those assumptions were based on the USGS numbers, and United's activities with Dr. Bachman showed that those numbers were wrong. And that yield really needs to be in the neighborhood of 100,000 acre feet. Steve alluded to the fact that we put Emergency Ordinance E in place to try to get us to that number. So we actually have some numbers that, in fact, we have been using as our most best guess right now. We heard a presentation from Tony Morgan last month or the previous meeting that said that the model that United has been working on with Dr. Sun from MIT, who works for United, the United employee, is taking longer than we anticipated at United. We think we'll have that out before the year is out, but and we don't know where that number is going to fall. I have heard from staff members at United that the impact of the National Marine Fisheries and the environmental issues on the Santa Clara River could take that 100,000 acre foot and drive it to 80,000 or 75,000. What we know right now today is the number we thought was correct of 125,000 is wrong. The best guess we had was 100,000, and we now know, based on our negotiations with National Marine Fisheries, that that number will go down significantly. It will not go up. So when you look at where we are collectively, both the cities and the ag community and all the entities that rely on water, the supply side of water available going forward is shrinking. And because it is shrinking, I will reiterate, it's my personal opinion that getting started on this project sooner than later, as we talked about, and recognizing that this yield number, the model itself, could dance all over the place, but until United actually gets a signed agreement with the federal government, I don't know where that number is going to be. And we are, in fact, in a dance with the proverbial 40 bazillion pound gorilla. That's the power of the federal government. I think we can come up with a plan that says our range is somewhere between. Where that number pegs out, I don't know. But we need to face the reality that the world today of safe yield is not what it was because the players are different. And that, to me, speaks to the allocation methodology. We heard a presentation. Brian gave it to us last month, or Andy, you introduced it. Was it last month, I think, or the month before? LPUG has done a yeoman's job of trying to come up with an allocation methodology, and that methodology was actually created without knowing what safe yield was. And there's enough flexibility in that methodology to reflect the changing nature of safe yield over time. It was actually built into the plan. I mean, Brian, and if I'm going off base, you correct me. You said, we're assuming a safe yield is here, and based on this is how the plan will work. What happens 3 years, 4 years, 10 years down the road, and we find out that safe yield number is not right? The plan has a methodology of reallocating, and so the allocation scheme allows, as I understand it, in the proposal in LPUG. Yes, they're working out the details, but the general consensus is that that allocation methodology it allows for these variations in the safe yield that will happen in time. We know today that there could be a loss of 8,000 acre-feet coming into the Santa Clara River as a result of what Castaic does with their effluent. They're working on that like little beavers, and to avoid the recharge that's been going down the Santa Clara River. One, because the chlorides are killing trees upriver, and they're coming up with a proposal to figure out how to put that to beneficial use. We know that the safe yield of the Santa Clara River is going to go down as a result of national marine fisheries. We don't know the exact numbers. We have to come up with an allocation scheme that adjusts to that. I believe that there's a group, maybe multiple groups, I don't know, that are working on the Oxnard Plain. They liked what they heard based on the discussion that LPUG gave about an allocation scheme, and I think that's motivated them to take a hard look at, could that scheme work for us? I think the fear that a lot of folks have is that somehow, some way, this panel of 5 is going to figure out the solutions to all the problems in the world. And I'm telling you right now, I do not have the brain capacity to figure that out. Sorry. I don't think collectively we have the brain capacity to figure it out. I think what the board's responsibility is to bring the process out on the table and make sure the process of finding a workable solution for all of us gets moved forward. So if we put down the marker to get this thing done, knowing that the safe yield is going to be in a range, and we say to the folks in LPUG and we say to the folks in the Oxnard Plain, you need to come up with an allocation scheme that has the flexibility to be adjustable as we lock some of these numbers down because of external forces that we have no control over. That's exactly what LPUG is proposing in the LPUG area for all practical purposes, because we don't know when SME is going to decide they're not going to take the water, but that'll have a huge impact on the recharge both in Camarillo and in the Las Posas area. We heard that from Camarillo's presentation last month as well. I don't know when and how that's going to happen. So I think that the direction to staff needs to be in the cost of the budget, the 1 year with enough flexibility and policy statement that says if it takes more time, we're going to give it the time as appropriate, and the board will make that determination. There needs to be some stakeholder, a little more clarity on how the stakeholder folks are going to get input. We need to give a little more clarity on a range of basin yield based on what we know now and what data points are missing that you've identified, and we can do that. For each individual basin, if necessary, yes. And we need to re-emphasize to those stakeholders that liked what they heard from what LPUG had to propose, to generate a proposal that's similar to that. If that's a model that works, it'll help LPUG, it'll help folks on the Oxnard Plain. I believe the board needs the input of the stakeholders, the cities and the growers, on how an allocation methodology will work. And if it's fair and logical and reasonable and we pass the public review process, I think that's the outreach everybody's actually looking for. I'm sure there's a couple of items I missed in this list. Tell me what I missed, because I made my list off to my head.
Well, you clarified a little bit with Director West here about the safe yield numbers being per basin. That's an important feature, and it was said by staff as well. And just another little tidbit, I would say that some of the other basins don't have quite that disparity, that flux on the supply side as the Oxnard side does. The unknowns by National Marine Fisheries throw the Oxnard Plain and the forebay into such a situation of uncertainty that some of the other basins don't face.
Yeah.
So,
but then in all fairness,
in terms of talking about it as a big number, we really have to talk about it, I think, as a grouping of numbers that equal a total.
But in all fairness, If you had asked me 25 years ago, would the Freeman and its operation be in jeopardy today? I'd have said, no, it's a great project. It's working.
Agreed.
I can't make that statement.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to say, I'm not sure you can actually make that statement in the Kiegas Creek. I don't know what entity is going to come out of the woodwork years from now, 5, 10, 15 years from now, who will throw a monkey wrench into a plan we put in place. The plan we put in place needs to have the flexibility, this board has to have the flexibility to adapt to those changes, because that's the nature of the beast we live with. So,
Chair, could I sidetrack for just a second?
Yeah.
And it was something you said earlier that we need to have a GSP, a groundwater sustainability management plan, in place before we can do supply side types of things, like collecting a replenishment fee. Is that true? Is that county council's understanding, or any other attorneys in the room? Is that a true statement?
Al?
That's my reading of the SGMA, that that financial authority is contingent on the adoption of a sustainability plan.
Okay, financial authority to collect a replenishment fee.
Correct.
But
and to engage in projects to enhance supply and groundwater storage.
Okay.
SGMA gives new agencies that, out of the blue, the ability to raise funds to sustain their operation as they're building those plans. But if the plan calls for a project, they can't raise funds for the project, specific project, until the plan is approved, and the approval process requires state buy-in to it, the way it's, as I understand it. Al, did I say that correctly?
Well, that last part's not clear. It all seems to be based on this agency's adoption and submittal of a plan. The state will review and assess the plan, but I don't believe that state approval is required before we can move forward with that.
Okay. All right. So, Jeff, I've rattled on here about some direction. Have I given you enough direction so that we have something to chew on by the next meeting?
Absolutely, I believe so. And the way I'm hearing the conversation and the direction I got from you and the comments from some of the other board members, the one thing you left off with, a couple board members said, what are we not doing? What are the core functions? That's all going to play itself out in the work plan we present to you in June. The work plan will be a GSP plan, and it'll be very clear what we can do and what we can't do. At that point, you can add, subtract. The other thing, a little bit of clarification. I know what we want from you, if it's possible. So you've all said the public input process is important. We've got some ideas on how to do that. We can present them as sort of straw persons, if you will, and at the next board meeting, and you can take some shots at it, but it would probably involve, just as you said, committee meetings, special board meetings, meetings of special groups, technical advisory, special stakeholder, user groups, whatever. But I encourage you to put on your thinking caps. We'll try to get our proposal to you early so you can dissect it and digest it, or dissect it, and then give us some improvements.
You had also said that because of the limitation of having a monthly meeting and the amount of hours that the board is together, could you put together what you think is the kind of meeting schedule that, and if you put together such a schedule, you got to have stuff for us to do at those meetings rather than doing nothing. Right?
Yes, I think we can. We'll take a shot at it. There's going to be some core administrative stuff that we're just going to have to do, but there's some stuff we can throw over the sides for a time. And that stuff largely, I believe, will be where we get the diminishing returns, where a lot of the enforcement stuff, the last 10% or 50 or 60% of the work, we may just discharge that for a moment while we work on this. But we'll bring all of that to you, and you can see. And a lot of the stuff that was in the work plan will probably be stuff that we have to do anyway. So, but we'll present it to you in the guise and in the clothing of a work plan next month, along with what we think the board meeting schedule should be and some selected stakeholder processes for you to pick apart.
Okay, so I verbalized some direction to staff. Dave, you okay with that as direction?
As you have verbalized it, yes.
They can play the tapes and figure out what I said. I can. Gina's okay. Steve, any comments? Are you okay?
Yeah, I think what I basically hear from the directions is let's get started. And I think everybody's on board for that. I mean, the arguments for delay are sometimes appropriate and logical, and sometimes they're not. But we have to recognize that they are a steady obstacle that is thrown at this board regularly, and we have to. We should always evaluate them cautiously and with a healthy degree of pushback, because it is the nature of the business that we're in that people are going to want to keep delaying and delaying those decisions that we have to make.
Neil? Okay, you have direction? Everybody in the audience heard the direction? Okay, let's go to item now. Jeff, what is your time frame, Steve?
I'm free.
Oh, okay. Then
relieved of duty.
All right, hold on. Let me, since that is the case, if it's okay with the, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back on to our, since I'm not limited by this time constraint. So what I'd like to do, if members are okay, is go to item E, public comments, non-agenda items, board comments. Let's just go right in sequence, and then we'll pick it up at item 4. Okay? So right now, public comments. Anybody have some public comments, non-agenda item public comments? Okay. Anybody have any board member comments, non-board member? The only comment I'll make, I'm sure you've all seen the news, the inflow to Lake Texoma, which is on the Texas-Oklahoma border, 3.5 million acre-foot storage. The inflow is 300,000 CFS. That's 300,000 acre-feet a day. Just give us 30 minutes of that. That's all we need. Amazing. Right. Some people have too much and we don't have enough. We have a consent calendar, 2 items, minutes that need to be approved. A motion, a second. Any objection? Okay, hearing none, so ordered. All right, now we're up to item number 4, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Rick Virgutz. I'll be presenting item number 4 today. And it's the proposed resolution 2015-2, which specifies reporting requirements for establishing an annual efficiency allocation by operators that supply groundwater for agricultural use by others. I have a relatively short presentation, and I will go quickly, and if you have questions, just let me know and I'll slow down. So, as you know, the emergency ordinance requires agricultural operators to now use this irrigation allowance index. But not all the operators are end users. They're not all growers. And so this new filing requirement's created a lot of discussion. We've been in front of your board several times with this, trying to get things right so they will work for the parties. In March, your board told us to keep at it, keep engaging with stakeholders. We held 2 stakeholder meetings in April. United Water was there, Zone was there, Pleasant Valley, County Waterworks District, and others. And your staff report mentions 3 sort of key concerns that are still out there. I'll go through those briefly, and we can discuss them more if necessary. The first one, and I think possibly the biggest one, has to do with surcharges. So this remains an important issue. And really the issue is whether or not surcharges could be passed back to the agricultural water provider. The resolution in front of you is really about reporting. It doesn't specify any new rules in surcharges. In the staff report, we say that, but we do mention that if your board wants to modify how surcharges are currently envisioned to possibly be passed back to these water suppliers, it could do so. We could look at it at a subsequent board meeting. Second issue was practical difficulties in just getting the information. There are different levels of this, but agricultural water suppliers have expressed some concern they may not be able to get all the information. GMA staff's response is that we don't have a relationship with their customers, they do. We feel that they should be able to get that information from their customers better than the GMA can. And the third, that ag suppliers should not be required to enforce the agency regulations regarding irrigation efficiency. They have within their authorities the ability to set the terms and conditions at which they'll supply water or groundwater to those users. So, on to the resolution. It does create certain exceptions for filing the efficiency. They're listed on the slide, but essentially they relate to an agricultural provider's customers. If their customers are well operators and also reporting to the GMA, those customers will continue to do that, and the agricultural provider wouldn't be required to do the paperwork for those customers. If they have a grower in their service area that is not a well operator, but that same grower is a well operator in the same basin, those growers can combine that acreage and apply for the irrigation allowance index for the land that's within the agricultural provider's service area. So those are exceptions to the agricultural provider doing the paperwork. And when I say paperwork, I'm talking about the irrigation allowance index paperwork. Also, another consideration is that the proposed resolution does allow agricultural water suppliers to perform the irrigation allowance index reporting in the aggregate. This has been the practice for some years. Zone and others do the reporting in the aggregate. They haven't been required to demonstrate the irrigation allowance index for each of their customers, and that will continue to be the case moving forward. What it doesn't include language that would require other operators to do the irrigation allowance index reporting when Pleasant Valley is not the sole source of the water. And it doesn't have language absolving Pleasant Valley or other water suppliers from surcharges if the irrigation allowance would be exceeded. So, just wrapping up, the approach in the resolution provides direction to water companies, districts, and others that provide water to growers. So it's important to be able to provide that direction. Like I say, some are already doing this, but this will be new for others. If your board wishes to consider changes to the irrigation allowance index program relating to water suppliers or relating to surcharges issues with water suppliers, that could be done at a future board meeting. And staff recommends adoption of Resolution 2015-2.
Okay, any questions for staff? Anybody in the audience? Bob, you were going to speak to this? Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Directors. Bob Kremer, representing Pleasant Valley County Water District. Try to keep the comments short since we did give you a comment letter, and I think you've had an opportunity to review that. We've had a series of very productive meetings and conversations with staff and council regarding this resolution. We're pleased with the outcome of those meetings. We're very appreciative of the efforts that were made by all concerned. We support the current resolution, but we're requesting that the board consider adding 2 single-sentence provisions. Those suggested provisions are detailed in our comment letter. They're very simple to implement. They'll clarify the resolution as well as more directly incentivize end users of extracted groundwater to use that groundwater efficiently. The first suggested provision would clarify, and follow me on this because we are in the weeds on this one, When an agricultural provider properly excludes an agricultural operator from the provider's IAI calculation, it would become the sole responsibility of the excluded agricultural operator to calculate their own IAI and file an annual application for efficiency allocation. Of course, PV, other water providers would have to give the operator the information they need to properly file the IAI. The second suggested provision would clarify that agricultural operators who are not also agricultural providers and who are responsible for calculating IAI would be solely responsible for any surcharges that result from their exceeding an IAI of 1. And this suggested provision could be adopted as a single-sentence revision to this resolution. It could be adopted as a one-sentence amendment to Emergency Ordinance E. We would like to see it done as a revision to this ordinance so that we can put this whole matter to rest. Prior to this meeting, we discussed both of these revisions with agency staff and consuls so they could be better able to advise the board. We're very appreciative, as I said, of board and staff's efforts in this matter and the way in which the board promoted outreach and a lot of discussion. There was a lot of data gathering that needed to be done. And we support the resolution. We're requesting only that you incorporate these two one-sentence changes that we detail in the comment letter and summarize in these comments. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Is the proposal to take this paragraph and add it to the end of the proposed Section 3 and add it to the end of Section 4, or to replace?
Okay, so if you did what's suggested in our preference would be that you have a new, and it's in the comment letter, you would have a new Section 3, a new Section 4, and then you would remunerate the rest of the resolution accordingly.
So, okay, so there would now be 3, 4, 5, 6
Correct.
sections. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, and you did discuss this with staff?
Yes.
And Al, have you seen this?
I have, and we did discuss this yesterday. The proposed new Section 3 is an acceptable add from my point of view. Section 4, and Bob and I have discussed this. My concern is this is a fundamental policy issue for your board, and I think it goes beyond the scope of what this resolution is intended to do, which is to provide that agricultural operators who are not themselves growers shall not be subject to surcharges if their customers do not establish that their irrigation practices are efficient under the standards that the agency has adopted. And this, as Rick said, this is just a series of reporting requirements, and so that's an issue for your board to consider, and if necessary, amend either the ordinance code or Ordinance E to provide for that exemption for suppliers of agricultural water. So it's essentially a decision for your board, but I don't believe it's appropriate to be included in this resolution.
And that includes both 3 and 4 as proposed?
No, just Section 4 as to surcharges.
Okay.
Section 3 is reporting, and I believe that's an acceptable add.
Okay, so you would be okay if we renumbered item 3, so then we'd have 4 and 5, but you would not be, you're not advising the board to include the one for Section 4, the new proposed language, Section 4.
Correct. I believe that issue should be agendized for a future board meeting and for discussion of potential amendment to the ordinance code or emergency ordinance E.
Okay.
And
right.
All right, we do. Actually, item 3 is the way we do it already. We're just formalizing that. Item 4, as Al says, is a bigger policy issue, not appropriate for this resolution.
Okay. Robert?
And just to reiterate, we think that if we do bring it back, it should be sooner than later, so that we get this resolved before there's an issue that arises, and also we do believe that, for example, an amendment to Ordinance E would be as simple as a single sentence to Article 2.
Okay. So the options, as I understand it before us, we can either adopt the staff's original resolution. We could adopt the resolution with the two proposed changes that you've submitted. We could adopt the ordinance with one of the changes, that is a new Section 3 renumbering the remaining two as staff has proposed. Those are the three options before us. Is there any other options? The other option would be not do anything, obviously, and wait till you guys resolve what you're going to do with this last one at some future date. That is an option, okay? So those are the four options, right, that are before us?
Well, I just didn't want to rule out any other revisions to the proposed resolution that your board or anyone else wants to propose.
Okay, and is it staff, Jeff, is it staff's recommendation that we adopt your proposal and including the new Section 3 but not Section 4 as proposed?
That would be our recommendation at this point.
Okay, all right. So that's the staff's recommendation. All right, gentlemen, what do you want to do?
I'll make that motion.
Let me clarify just one quick thing. The part that I found confusing with this language from Mr. Krimmer, but I also see it in the resolution, I think, is when we're talking about agricultural provider, we're talking about like a PV or a zone mutual. When we say agricultural operator, we are saying agricultural well operator?
Yes.
Okay. Why not say that?
Stick in the word well.
Yeah.
Can we do that, Al?
Yes.
Okay. You okay?
It's fine with me.
Okay. So if Gene's ready to make a motion. So any other discussion before we get there?
May I get a question in first?
Okay.
On the item that is being recommended to come back at another time for policy discussion, if it comes back as a proposed amendment to Ordinance E, that's a temporary ordinance. It seems to me, is that not? And it seems to me that if you really wanted that to come back and be a permanent thing, you would put it someplace else.
Correct. In fact, my recommendation would probably be to amend the ordinance code, not just Ordinance E.
That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, sir. Let me hear from the public here on this, please. Yeah, we do that. Oh, yeah. Jason, please.
Jason Weiner on behalf of Wish Toyo Foundation and its Ventura Coastkeeper program. And I'm not sure if this language cures this concern of ours, so my apologies if it does. But essentially, we're a little bit concerned about III reporting in the aggregate, eliminating the need for individual growers to comply with the efficiency requirements. We feel there should be an equal playing field and interest of ensuring best management practices are adopted throughout the county, that is best efficiency and conservation practices. And we really think that each farmer should be held to those III standards and any efficiency and conservation practices that are established by this board to better sustain our groundwater supplies and the flows in the Santa Clara River, for instance. So I'm not sure if those changes would fix that concern of ours, but it is a concern of ours. And we do agree that in terms of the surcharge, there needs to be some clarity as to how whether the water supplier or the individual farmers would be responsible for surcharges if they exceeded their III. So,
okay, all right, thank you.
you.
Carol?
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. Carol Schoen, Zone Mutual Water Company. We have been working for this for months and months and months, and I think it's to the point where we should adopt this resolution because we're going to be reporting in a matter of months. So we need to have this all clarified. And I would like to support what Bob Krimmer has put forth, in that, yes, I believe, and I'm happy to see that you are in agreement that we could include his new Section 3. I think it just clarifies that the water supplier isn't, if the water supplier does everything that they're supposed to do, and that is report to the GMA, that the agricultural operator that needs to include the amount on their reporting, if it is excluded for some reason, omitted by them, that you're not coming back to the supplier, that it is the agricultural operator that would be held accountable for not having complete paperwork or a penalty. I would really think we could put this thing to bed if we could just include this last sentence on the next section. I really have a hard time. We have done diagrams and we've talked this thing back and forth. It would be really nice to just be able to put this thing to bed and have the fact that an operator or an agricultural provider with no visibility as to what someone with a well is doing and is required to report, that any penalties that they would incur over and above what they pump themselves would come back. It should just end there. They're doing the reporting. If the report is over one, they should pay the penalty. And that just solves it. So we're so busy in this agency with everything else that we're doing now. We've got another thing that's going to come back and get hashed out. Let's just clean it up. Can't we just clean it up? Okay. It's one sentence, and I think it makes it very clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. Dave.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Board. I just want to reiterate, this is Dave Sasek from the Waterworks Districts. Carol did a fantastic job summarizing what I was going to say, so I'm not going to repeat it, but I think that her point is very, very important to the Waterworks Districts as well, as we look at working within our allocation and being held accountable for somebody else's use of water. Thank you.
Okay. Let me, before you make the motion, Al, your recommendation, is it the same, or are you changing your recommendation not to include Section 4?
My recommendation remains the same. I was trying to address Director Borchard's request to add the word well, and I think I've identified the several places in the draft resolution where it would need to be inserted, including the language that was proposed by Pleasant Valley.
Okay.
So that just, if that is going to be the motion, that should be recited for the record.
Okay. Gene.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2015-02, amending the term agricultural operator to be agricultural well operator everywhere it appears, and to include in the resolution the paragraph labeled New Section 3 in Mr. Krimmer's May 26, 2015 letter to the board.
Okay, that's the motion. And renumber the others.
Yes.
A second? Steve has the second. Okay, let's have a roll call on that, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Andrews?
Yes.
Director Bennett? Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to item number 5.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. For the record, Rick Birgutz. I'll be presenting item number 5 today. And this is follow-up for Ordinance Code compliance concerns made evidence through the well inspection pilot program and approaches to future well inspections. This presentation is also fairly short. You're going to see some repetition of text in your board letter that refers to staff's specific direction. Okay, so April, we presented a report to your board on the results of the pilot program for inspection of wells in Las Posas basins. Your board said, come back, give us a little bit more information on how you're going to follow up with the data and reporting concerns, also non-responsiveness or refusal of requests for the well inspection, and also approaches for future well inspections. So let me just get right down into it. I'll be following that order in the report to your board today. So for data and reporting concerns, the staff report has a table in it. It identifies what those are to date, and it identifies how staff is following up on those. And staff's recommendation is that we continue doing what is shown on that slide. And it might be good if I just stop here because there's some text on that. Ask your board if you have any questions on what's on the slide.
Okay, any questions? Nope, go ahead.
Okay. Moving on. So our specific recommendation for that component is to do what it says we're doing on the slide. We're already doing that, so we plan to continue with that. Second issue was the non-responsiveness or refusal of requests. So we talked about this last time. It's just a quick recap. So 79 wells were not inspected for reasons that were either non-responsiveness or refusal. Most of it was non-responsiveness to the requests. So of that 79, about half, maybe a little bit more, are wells that we understand to be active or wells that may be active. So completing those remaining inspections we believe would be useful. Your board suggested that may be useful. If we complete those, that will help give us a more complete baseline for the well inspection program, help us understand more fully what the real issues are in terms of the compliance and the reporting. And with that better baseline, that would help better frame future well inspection programs. Moving on with that same topic, the staff report talks about the agency developing some more specific standards for conducting routine well inspections, and that in the event the agency seeks an inspection warrant, your board should determine whether or not to delegate that decision to the executive officer. Our specific recommendation on this is that you direct staff to develop specific standards for conducting well inspections and delegate the authority to the executive officer to decide under what circumstances the agency should seek an inspection warrant. Third bullet, approaches to a future well inspection program. We looked into random sampling. We think it would provide useful information. The better the baseline is moving into a program like that, the better the random sampling program would be. To determine a sample size, we'd use some basic statistical methods. We'd look at the margin of error and the confidence level. We've done this just from a very high level, but conceptually right now, if we were to be putting together a random well inspection, it would include somewhere between 200 and 275 wells. That's a very rough estimate. Other approaches, completing the well inspection in the Las Posas Basin would provide a better baseline to develop a random inspection program, and compliance-related inspections may also be necessary. So that summarizes that issue, and then our specific recommendations for this are to complete the well inspections in the Las Posas Basins for the well owners and operators that were either not responsive or refused the earlier inspection requests. And the inspections would draw on the expanded agency authority only if necessary to complete those inspections. And then in fiscal year 15-16 begin another well inspection program that would select wells randomly and also include compliance-based inspections. And in conclusion, the compliance follow-up is ongoing. We're using the approaches in that table on page 1 of your staff report. We have roughed out the process to obtain the administrative inspection warrants, and approaches for future well inspections are also described. So what I'm going to do is, and this is going to seem redundant, and it may be redundant, but let me just go into the specific recommendations. So again, recommendation for that category in the board letter regarding the data and reporting concerns identified with the pilot program. We're asking your board to provide us specific recommendation on the approach outlined in this slide. Second slide has to do with the second component in the staff report. We're asking your board to provide us specific recommendations. We have listed our recommended recommendations. We're asking your board to tell us if we're on track or if you want us to change the approach. And the same thing with the third main item in the staff report, the approaches to a future well inspection program. These are our specific staff recommendations. We're asking for your direction on these. And that's all I have.
Okay, questions for staff? What would you like as comments? What folks want to do? Any public comments? My personal opinion is we began this up in the Las Posas area because the LPUG area, because of all the work LPUG has done and trying to figure out exactly what they have in their area. They're ahead of the game for a lot of us. So this was kind of a test process. We awarded the contract, and this is the results we've got. I think we need to see this through. There's been some discussion that we ought to go into other areas of our responsibility and do the same thing. But until we refine the methodology and get a methodology that works, is consistent, we ought to stay in this area. So I agree with staff's recommendations that we continue to get the data we need in this area. The only question I would ask is, there is a lot of reluctance on the part of a lot of landowners to have Big Brother come in and do the inspections. We have the authority to do that, so that's not a question. In terms of an outreach, I'll direct this, Andy, I'm going to direct this question to you guys. Would it be, this is primarily done in your area of work that LPUG has been working in, would it be appropriate for LPUG to draft a letter trying to explain to the growers, owners, what LPUG has been trying to accomplish, what we're trying to accomplish, and make a overture? We need to let this inspection go on. The alternative is we just go right to this process of giving the executive officer the authority to do the legal process that we have the right to. And
that's fine. We can meet with staff too and discuss the problems that happen.
I mean, I'm not trying to create more work for staff. Obviously, we've heard the discussion. We're going to get really bogged down into some very serious issues moving forward. But to the extent that if we could have some kind of community statement from people similarly situated saying, hey, look, we're doing this to ourselves. This is part of our process. It's no big deal. Let's get on with it.
That would be absolutely fine, and we can work with staff on how to streamline what we just went through so that we don't have to have the same person visiting the well sites 5 and 6 times with inadequate data at their hands. Maybe the GSI maps, they could have that information with the GPS coordinates on hand so that it can make it easier so that we're not burdening these pumpers with
multiple visits,
same question over again. Let's come back. So yeah, that would be fine, and we can work with staff on that. That'd be great.
Okay. So the recommendation you're asking for is that we approve staff's recommendation. It's 3 recommendations, right?
Correct.
With the caveat that I would put the caveat that before we go into the second one, which is I'm more than happy to give the executive officer the authority to do what he has to do, but let's have that meeting with the LPUG group to see how we can streamline either the introductory letter or some other processes before Jeff has to make a hard decision. and somebody says, well, why didn't you just ask me? I would have been able to do this. So at least we're covering one more formal way of getting in there.
I understand.
That's how I would package it.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes.
On this slide here, the B item, and also includes compliance-based inspections. Now, how would you determine the compliance-based inspections that are necessary? Is it the ones that have not been responsive in the past? Is that all you're talking about? Or
No.
Okay.
What B is, B would be decoupled from the Las Posas well inspection pilot program. B would be a new program, which would be the random well inspection program. But within that, we think that we should also plan on doing some compliance-related inspections. Those would be inspections that we may do if we cannot seem to get an operator to report extractions on the wells. We have, and this is not news, but the GMA has difficulty with reaching well operators and getting them to report from time to time.
I'm aware.
And so this would be a way to get out there and verify if the well is being used or not. So
Okay.
that's what that would be for.
All right, so basically this is, every operator, well operator is supposed to be in compliance, and at any point in time, if they're not, you could then utilize this kind of inspection.
That would be the thought.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Just a question, Rick. If a well inspection is performed, who pays the cost of that inspection?
Well, the GMA has been paying the cost for that inspection.
Is there a process in place so that if a warrant is necessary to effect an inspection, the cost can be borne by the well operator?
That's a good question. I don't know.
No, there's no process in place?
No, but a process could be put in place.
Something to consider.
We could make that as part of the, could we add that to this list of recommendations? I've added to the list of recommendation that staff work with the LPUG group to streamline our introductory letter. We could add that we direct staff to add a warrant recovery process. Okay? We shouldn't be having to pay for this. A lot of people are complying, and there are people that just, for whatever reason, don't.
Yes, the inspection fee requirement may need to come back to your board as another ordinance change, though.
Okay. That's what staff's asking for. Bob, did you want to speak to this?
On the subject of recovering the costs of the warrant, I would just ask Al to look carefully at that issue as to whether an agency can defer its cost of enforcing its own regulations prior to establishing a violation. I would question whether or not the cost of actually drafting the warrant, executing the warrant, would be recoverable from the individual. But after a violation has been established, perhaps there would be enforcement costs that are recoverable.
Robert, the warrant would only issue if there had been a failure to comply with the regulation requiring a reporting.
I'm talking about, I'm focusing purely on the inspection warrant issue because as I understand what you're talking about, the violation you would be using as the basis for a reasonable suspicion that there is a violation it's a little confusing to me on what basis you're going to go in, for what reason you're going in and inspecting if you already know there's a violation. You follow what I'm saying?
But the violation would be they're not reporting.
Okay.
That in and of itself is the violation.
So you know that. So why do you need to inspect at that point if you know if you've established a violation?
We need to know what the numbers are that are coming out of the well.
Okay.
Somebody's got to read that meter.
Okay.
He's not returning it. That individual's not returning the numbers in.
My only point is to look carefully at recovery of administrative warrant costs. Well, I'd say,
Okay, I'm not laughing. The audience is now coming forward. Thank you. Paul, I'm going to defer to Mike for his seniority, and then I'll go to you. The esteemed Mike. Dr. Mike.
Mike Kelly, farmer. Well, Paul and I were having an interesting discussion. Our friendship, our families go back a longer way, so it's about an equal deal. If you recall, I had considerable input in trying to put this together, and the purpose of the random nature of the selection was that we not show preference to suspected evildoers or not. The Pope will let you inspect him, but Al Capone wouldn't, and so you just to have volunteers, you need a random unless you're going to do 100%. And my experience back in my inspection days, we did a random table of numbers, and that was considered to be totally adequate for contract enforcement. A failing link that I would like to address in this, and it has come embarrassingly so about 500 yards west of my property, where Zones Well 19 is, we had an egregious violator come to our attention in the beginning of this year, I guess, in that we had a person who had a well. It wasn't, obviously it had to have a well number because it was drilled, and it was drilled within the last 20 years or so. I don't know exactly when it was drilled. And we were trying to figure out, when that was. But the problem is that the county, there seems to be a lack of coordination between Well Division and Fox, and that Fox doesn't have the ability to know where all the wells are, but the permit to drill a well, state well number, all these things are available. We need to coordinate it between Fox Canyon and the county public works, because this particular well was drilled, obviously, not ancient times. The purchaser of the well, of the property rather, somehow evaded just what Mr. West was commenting, where are the wells or who has it. He did not report. He solicited adjoining properties to purchase water from him at a lesser rate than the mutual that was serving them, and had previously, the mutual had served this property before it had a well on it. That property is 50 acres. I think the property adjacent is 70, and there's another one 20. So, we have a good-sized piece of property here that for several years never reported and didn't appear on the list for Fox to inspect. So the failure here, I think, is getting a proper, basic list of all the wells, because this well came to the attention when the new buyer, a very reputable and good buyer, went to register his new ownership of the well and was told it hadn't been reporting, and they were trying to find him, and we had to excuse that. And so there is then no way to go back and go after the seller, who at this time had been selling water out of this well for numerous years. And yet, if you add that all up, at 4 acre feet on 150 acres a year, that's a good amount of money that has not come to this agency in the $4 a foot charges. More importantly, it disrupts a way of knowing the true accountability of the total water take in the county. So I think that an effort needs to be made somehow to better coordinate between the divisions that our CEO runs, is between the county's numbers of where the wells are and whether they are registered with the Fox. That seems to be, because otherwise your random table of numbers doesn't grab opportunity for everybody to get inspected.
Okay.
So that's my point. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Paul.
Paul Diebescher, grower on the Oxnard Plain. We have a penalty system that's already in place for meter calibrations, I think it's $500. And non-reporting of $50 a day, those funds could be used to offset the cost of gaining compliance. The inspection, I don't know how much it costs to send a person out there, a GMA person or a county person out there to look at that well, and I know there are costs that go with that, but if somebody has already non-reported and they're 6 months late, that's thousands of dollars of assessments, assuming that they're collected, that could be used to offset the cost of guaranteeing compliance.
Okay, thanks, Paul. All right, so we can move on here. We've got 3 items. We've asked staff to look at the warrant issue. Paul has raised the question, can you get those funds another way? So as you kind of look through this, figure out what's the best way to offset the cost of this non-compliance issue. And Mike has suggested that at some point we do some kind of audit against county well records and make sure that the table between GMA well numbers and the county well numbers are in sync. Okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
One comment here. I have a little bit of concern about the notion of random inspection, not because it would be statistically appropriate, but it also leaves open the chance that some wells will never get inspected that ought to be inspected. And so perhaps an alternative method is to do a portion of the well fields 1 year, another portion another year, and so forth and so on, using the same sample size, 200 or whatever it is, and assure yourself that eventually you get all of them inspected.
Okay, do you hear that as a possible? It may be the random methodology should be done in sequential zones if you want, rather than as a large.
As a large random pool.
Yes.
Yeah, I think your board discussed that, but we can certainly bring it back.
Yeah, take a look at that. All right, I want to move this thing on so we can get on with business. I need a motion to direct staff to accept staff's recommendations with 2 caveats: to look at the warrant issue, the nature of the random inspection, and the use of penalty monies that we already have the authority to collect, and Mike's issue of making sure we have a balance between the county wells and the GMA wells. Okay, I'll make that as a motion. I need a second. You want a second? Sure. All right, a motion and a second. Any other discussion? I normally don't make motions. I don't know why I got sucked into that one. But roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Andrews?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, down to informational item number 6.
This is an informational item. This is a follow-up from our May 8th special board meeting where your board requested a status report. Just a few items to report on this. We did contact the city and request a meeting. That meeting is still pending. I believe going to occur at a slightly higher level than initially proposed. And then the other news to report, at 10:30 this morning we received the peer review report from the city, and we understand that their city council the agenda for the certification for the EIR is scheduled for June 10th. Originally it was scheduled for today. So
Okay.
at least we had heard that. So that's what I have to report.
All right, anybody have any questions on that? Anybody in the audience have any questions? Just purely an informational item? Lucy?
For the record, Lucy McGovern, City of Camarillo. I do want to confirm Fox Canyon staff's report, but I also wanted to give you information that we are talking to the other parties, and we're hoping that in the very near future we can come, all 3 of us together, and present a joint project.
Good.
So that's the reason why we wanted to have those discussions before we actually met with staff on some of the other pending items.
Yeah, very good. Having heard your presentation, having thought about it, I recall when Steve Bachman made his presentation before the board and outlined the problem, the brackish problem that is in the area in question. He talked about it's a regional problem, and thinking about it, there's got to be a regional, some kind of solution to the problem that doesn't divide the problem up and then we get handed with trying to figure out the end game and what we do with all kinds of other individuals. So I'm pleased that you guys are talking. That's encouraging.
Yes. As a matter of fact, tomorrow is going to be several meetings
Very
on
good.
that with different parties.
Right. Anybody have any questions or comments on that issue? Okay. All right. Very good. Do we have to vote on a receive and file on that motion? I need a motion to receive and file. Motion and a second. Motion and a second. Any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. We're going to adjourn to closed session, confer with legal counsel, and then counsel, are we going to reconvene or just report out that you don't expect any? Tell me what you're going to.
It's possible that there will be a report out of closed session.
Okay, there's possible there'll be a report out of closed session. We don't know. All right? Before we adjourn, anybody have anything else? Going once? Twice? Meeting adjourned to closed session. All right. Good. Okay?